So I'm trying to keep my remarks as brief as I can, but I just want to build on what I started lunch, that America is in crisis. And I think the best description of it came from Bishop Sheen. Over 50 years ago, he predicted what was going to happen today. He said that the foundation of American democracy is the word pietas, which is patriotism. Patriotism is love of God, love of neighbor, and love of country. That anytime any one of those is compromised, then the country's in peril. But he also said that the national symbol for America is the eagle, and it nests high in the crevices of the mountain. And when an eagle gets to a certain age, it takes the feathers out of the nest and pushes the eaglet down, and it falls towards earth. But just before it crashes, the mother grabs it and takes it back up to the top. And she continues this until the bird learns to fly. I think this is what God is doing to this country. We're down at the point where we're about to crash, and he's going to reach up and grab us and take us back up to the top until we learn to fly again the way we did. I believe that in my heart of hearts. But God has no other hands but ours. If it's going to happen, we're going to have to make it happen. And we're not going to do this as long as there is tribal conflict. Because there are people who are deliberately trying to destroy this country by using the experience of Black Americans with slavery and Jim Crow to make a statement that condemns this nation to be forever racist, with every white person as an oppressor and every Black person a victim. I don't know how you build anything by tearing things down. And so one of the myths that I try to debunk from those who are trying to tear this country apart is that the problems facing Black America today, of the out of wedlock births at 70%, the violent crime, more Blacks are killing other Blacks in 1 year than was hanged by the Klan in 40 years. I call them self-hate crimes. And so, out of wedlock births, all of these problems, the people who are trying to destroy this country try to falsely comment that it is a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. Well, what we did at the Woodson Center is chronicle that and disprove it. And as I said in my address, in our essays, we talked about how marriage flourished after slavery, that there were institutions within the Black community that came up and addressed every problem that we had. So we didn't need the government, all we needed to do. But the civil rights movement sought to open the doors of opportunity so that we can be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And once that was achieved, I don't think some people could pass that character test. So they wanted to switch it back to identity and say we should be defined by our identity or our sexual orientation, everything but our character. Maybe they couldn't meet the character test. But the solution is not to just to engage in debate and argument. We must demonstrate to the country that the values of the founders have the consequence of improving the quality of the life of people. So there are examples that exist throughout history that we chronicled in our book, where when whites were at their worst, Blacks were at their best. Only 10% of slaves could read after slavery. In less than 50 years, that number increased to 70%, not because of what government did or what white people did, it's what Black folks did through their own institutions. They have Sabbath schools that we taught. We closed the education gap between 1920 and 1940 in the South by establishing 5,000 Rosenwald Booker T schools. We have 5 high schools in the North and in the South that had used textbooks, crumbling buildings, and half the budgets of white schools, and every one of those schools out-tested the white schools in their cities during 1920 in the depths of segregation. But today, those same schools, children are graduating of the 13 schools in Baltimore. Not a single child could read at grade level. So obviously, racism and Jim Crow didn't prevent blacks from achieving against the odds in the midst of slavery. So how can you contend that conditions are worse today than they were back then? So what we must do then is embrace an agenda that is positive. That what government did in the 60s is destroy the family. It was almost dollars for dads. And it disrupted that family. That's why we have the headlock. We don't have a race problem, we have a grace problem. And the answer is to address the moral and spiritual freefall that is destroying our communities. And it's destroying not just black children. According to a Harvard study, that the highest percentage the cause of death for blacks is homicide. And in Silicon Valley, where there are two-parent households with an average of $190,000, the suicide rate among teens is 6 times the national average. Among Appalachian whites is prescription drugs. I was invited by Senator Lee 5 years ago to come to this city, where I met with 40 parents who lost their children to suicide. So the only way we're going to address this crisis is we can't do it as long as we have to look suspiciously at each other through the lens of race. But we must come together to find out about this hole that's in the hearts of our children that causes them to devalue their life to the point where they want to take yours, take someone else's, or take their own. It's different sides of the same coin. You cannot say to a white mother in Silicon Valley that her challenge is she's privileged, or say to a mother in urban centers that her problem is injustice and white oppression. No, we must address that moral and spiritual thirst that is in the hearts of our children, and it can only be done by people who are moral mentors and character coaches. And our grassroots leaders are moral mentors and character coaches. But let me give you an example of what a solution looks like. In terms of a real life solution today, that will set the tone. About the family, the destruction of the family. You can learn a lot from studying animals. All of you should look at on YouTube about Kruger National Park. About 25 years ago, they were overrun with baby elephants. So they took these baby elephants and trucked them way back in the jungle. And after 20 years, they were getting reports from the villagers that these teenage elephants were destroying villages and killing white rhinos. They were not acting like elephants. So they put cameras up, and they saw they had become a gang. But what they did was reintroduce 2 bull elephants into the family. And within 1 week, there was peace established. It was parental oversight. We did the same thing in Benning Terrace 25 years ago, in Washington, D.C. 53 murders in a 5 square block area because of warring factions. We took 5 bull elephants, ex-offenders like Ron and others, who are moral mentors, and they went into that community where this killing and identified 16 young people who were creating the problem, brought them to my office where we had a meal waiting for them. They said no one ever asked us to be peaceful. But through mentoring these kids and standing with them, they changed their attitude and values by witnessing to them that just because you're in poverty, you don't have to be of it. And as a consequence, these young men who were predators became ambassadors of peace, and they became coaches to the kids, because we tell them that if we help you, you have to give something in return for what's been done. And when you give young people a moral responsibility for other young kids, we went from 53 murders down to 0 for 12 years. We documented this. Final example of where solutions exist. There was a community in Detroit called Pilgrim Village, where Pastor Lee Earl moved into his church. And there were 50 houses that were boarded up, and drug dealers were running in and out of it. Well, he took the resources of his church and he purchased these houses to renovate them. But he couldn't get bank financing to fix them up because the insurance company were redlining him, and so did the banks because he didn't have insurance. Now, if you're looking at it through the lens of protests, you lead demonstrations outside of Allstate and the Detroit National Bank. What we did, by contrast, is go to the insurance company and said, the reason you redlined in this whole neighborhood is because you cannot make individual character decisions about people there. Come and join me to meet Pastor Earl. And they spent a day seeing people who are being trained for home ownership. That the construction crews included ex-offenders who were working in the construction of the buildings. When they saw how the pastor was addressing their concerns, they said, we have 5 more issues, risk factors. If you address these risk factors, we will insure you. They addressed the risk factors. They got insurance. They went to the bank. They got $60,000 per unit to renovate, and the community was restored. They had a restaurant when there was no restaurants there, but they hired one guy, Walt, who did 13 years in prison. It became Walt's Restaurant.
Wow. Walt.
No one robbed him. He said to Pastor Earl, you don't have to escort Mrs. Earl here to open up in the morning. She's safe. Because you build from within the community people who got moral authority, and then you build economic and social structures around this moral authority, and you can establish a restoration of a whole community. And so there are examples of the function of mediating institutions. And what we must do, ladies and gentlemen, we can't do this if we are confronting the issue of race, or if your approach is confrontation and demonstration. But if you get paid to demonstrate, then you look at a situation like Pastor Earl's and you lead demonstrations. But if you get paid to develop, that's why we must support people who use their influence to rebuild communities. And that's the standard of which we should use to determine who we should support with our money, our time, and our effort. That these grassroots leaders are healing agents. That the human body is oriented towards health. At the moment there's injury, healing begins. These grassroots Josephs are healing agents. And together they can become a whole immune system that can rebuild a whole community from the inside out and the bottom up. And so this is where I hope that the reason that I'm in Utah, because I have never been to a place where I was met with the governor, leaders of the House and Senate, 35 grassroots leaders, and 5 college presidents. And there was a consensus that we need to rebuild from within. And there was support of a strong group of grassroots leaders that are in this room today. I don't know where you found them, Jamie, but they're here. And so what the Woodson Center wants to do is help you be healing agents in this city so it can be a model for how an entire city can be restored and do away with this race grievance industry that's going to rip this country apart. And I brought along my colleague, Josh Mitchell, who knows about these institutions that I talked about, the history of them and the making of America. And government has squashed them. They have diminished them. I could take you another hour to our chapter and verse about how the government destroys institutions that have healing power in these communities. So the first thing the government can do is stop hurting and then let people build. But the main thing is overcome this whole issue. Experts are not the people with college degrees. 3% of the people are entrepreneurs. There's 70% of the jobs. And entrepreneurs tend to be C students, not A students. As A.D. Gaston, old 106-year-old entrepreneur, multimillionaire from Alabama. He said it's better to say I is rich than I am poor. There's a lot of people who don't say ain't eating. So let me just stop there.
Thank you. So I want to thank everyone for coming out. I'd like to thank Utah Valley University and the Gary Herbert Institute of Public Policy. Thank you. There are 3 people that I absolutely need to recognize because they are in a position to make my life miserable on the state school board. So to avoid that, one is House Member and Representative Judy Weeks-Roner. Thank you. She's here in a wheelchair. That is one where we would have given her a bye on, but she still made an effort to come, so thank you. The other person in a position to make my life miserable is fellow board member Natalie Klein. She is here, so I want to make sure that we recognize her. Thank you. And I thought I saw Corinne Dixon from, yeah.
Corinne Johnson.
Corinne
She's
Johnson.
got to pay for her.
Oh, did she? Okay. So she can have like 10,000 people send emails to my inbox. So I wanted to make sure that we recognize her and acknowledge her and the good work that she does. 3 great people who work hard representing you in their elected or non-elected capacity. So I wanted to make sure that I recognize them. So I just want to start, and let's dive right in. I want to start with Carlos, if I could.
Okay.
So, my mother, she fled North Korea as a young girl. She is a political refugee, came here to the United States. But I want to ask you, Carlos, in Venezuela, when the socialists were out of power, but they were seeking power, what promises did they make? How did they get the majority of people to look at them and say, this is the direction we need to go as a country? Because I'm sure they didn't promise people what we see today, which is poverty, starvation, hunger. What were they promising the people that resonated with them to elect them to office?
That's a complex answer. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Yeah,
Yeah. Hello?
we hear you.
Okay.
You've got a strong voice anyway, you're good.
Yeah, that's a complex answer. We had 2 problems when the socialists started campaigning. The first one was our weak political.
Here, take that.
Hello. Okay. The first we had 2 problems. The first one was the weak politician that we had in the country. They underestimated how evil this political ideology is. They didn't care about what happened in our universities, college, and everywhere in the society. And the second thing is they was promised, the socialists start promising social justice. They start promising the redistribution of the money of everyone equally. We have a lot of oil in the country. We had the first oil reserve in the world, and they promised to distribute that in the population. And many people bite that promise, and that's why always, when you are in a situation, when you see your politicians that they don't care the people, when you see the politicians when they don't care the community, they don't listen the community,
That's right.
people is desperate to look for other options and punish those people who supposed to be serving the people. That's what happened in Venezuela. It's a lot of things, a lot of bills, a lot of stuff, but that's what happened.
Good, thank you. And Joshua, if I could follow up with you, you're a professor at Georgetown University. there are a lot of things happening at universities that I think people maybe weren't privy to before, but they're seeing that there's something grossly wrong at many of our colleges and universities, obviously with the exception of Utah Valley University. But what is happening? And is the American public overreacting, or are we underestimating the problem?
Well, first I want to say I think this works. Got it? I've been honored to work with Bob for 4 years. I do believe he's one of our few true national treasures. And I have lots of responsibilities at Georgetown, but frankly, the most important thing I'm doing with my life right now is working with Bob. I'm going to go at this in two different directions. So I'll do this survey with you, and maybe some of you will see where I'm going, but what I'm going to try to indicate here is the state of mind of many of my students, and I don't mean just at Georgetown. I teach in Europe. I've spent about 15% of my life in the Middle East, maybe 10 years total teaching and building a university in Qatar and in Iraq, and I've taught in Latin America. So what I'm saying here, I see everywhere. So first, around the globe, everybody's taking selfies, and they're on Instagram. And there's an immense sense of power that young people have there. And yet, when you ask them, so can we solve problems locally? They'll say, no, it's too big. There's climate change, there's systemic racism, all sorts of problems. It's always too big. And what I see in my students is this strange paradox, which was captured by an author 180 years ago. He said, this is about Alexis de Tocqueville, the great prophet of American democracy. He said, I see a day coming when Americans will see themselves as greater than kings and less than men. What he's describing is manic depression. So what's happening with our young people is they're oscillating back and forth between feeling quite empowered to befriend people on social media platforms, to cancel them, and yet utterly impotent in terms of dealing with problems in the world. They're either all global problems, or they're only focused on their self. Now, this was predicted 180 years ago, that this would be the future of the world. And we say manic depression is a mental problem, and a number of authors said there's a deeper social problem, and that is the modern world is characterized by growing isolation and loneliness. This is the great crisis of our time. And this prophet of democracy, Alexis de Tocqueville, who I've taught 100 times and read for 40 years, he said, listen, there's only one way that we can solve this. There's only one way. We have to recognize that as we march into this democratic age, the state is going to grow stronger, and individuals are going to feel more and more disempowered. And they will look up to the powerful state more and more and not look out to their neighbors. And this is what brings about the new tyranny. A tyrant will forgive citizens for not loving him, provided they do not love each other. This is the best guarantee of tyranny, is that we're not making connections. And his argument was, to all of his aristocratic friends who thought that democracy was nothing but chaos, he said, no. The real end of democracy is complete quietude, where people are lonely and isolated, locked into their own little worlds, looking to the state to take care of them. He said there's only one antidote, and this is why Bob is the living example of this. There's only one antidote to this. We can't live focusing on the state. We can't continue to think of ourselves only as isolated individuals, what I call now selfie man. We've all become selfie man. No, what we have to do is build a world together in face-to-face associations through these mediating institutions. Tocqueville said, democracy unleashes an energy never before seen in human civilization, but only if you and I are constantly engaged with each other in face-to-face associations. we must do this. So my students, one half of the answer is that my students are suffering terribly, oscillating back and forth, feeling utterly impotent, feeling sovereign. And Tocqueville thought the only way that we could attenuate that problem, not solve it, make it less, is if we're constantly building a world with one another in face-to-face relations. And that's the whole point that Bob has been making for 40 years, and it's time we all listen. Second point. I think going forward we have two choices. We can either build a world around competence, which is exactly what Tocqueville thought we could only do if you and I are constantly developing competence in these mediating institutions. Or we can go forward thinking only in terms of innocent victimhood. And I want to tell you a story. I left Georgetown for 2 years. My friends thought I was insane. My family thought I'd lost my mind. I went to Sulaymaniyah, Iraq, and became the chancellor of the American University of Iraq with 2 armed bodyguards who were with me 24 hours a day. And there's been a lot of hardship in Iraq. In the 1990s, Saddam Hussein gassed this village. It was actually known as an offensive called the Anfal. Children watched their parents gassed, dying as their lung tissues turned green and came up through their throats, and their eye tissues bubbled over, and they watched them die. Terrible, terrible suffering. So we set up a scholarship for these kids. And we had American faculty members there. And immediately a war broke out about how to treat these kids. And a majority of the faculty said, they've been through so much. They're innocent victims. Don't hold them accountable. They don't have to get their homework in on time. If they don't pass their classes, we'll pass them on anyway. And about 5 or 6 of us said, no. And we had a war in that school. Because our view is, we must pay attention to the suffering around the world. We have to do that. But we have to do it with sympathy, not empathy. And I think this is an important distinction. When you're sympathetic, you've got one foot in the swamp with them and one foot out saying, here, I will help you come out. When you're empathetic, you're fully in there with him, with those people, and you understand their suffering and you're their defendants, but you're defending them to the point where you're not helping them. And I think this is the great crisis we face around the world, but especially in America. Is innocent victimhood a reason not to hold people accountable? There's lots of suffering. We have a racial wound that has yet to be healed, and not only that, there are lots of wounds that have yet to be healed. But the question is, how do we go forward today? And the only way we can help all the people that we're trying to help is by holding them accountable and moving forward and turning away from the idea that the only thing we need to pay attention to is innocent victimhood. We have to build a world of competence, and that's how we restore America.
Thank you. So this is for Dr. Green, following up on what the professor just said. If the most important thing we can do today is build relationships with each other, how do we do that with this tide of incivility, where before, you know, your neighbor, maybe they were pro-gun, you're anti-gun, they're Democrat, you're Republican, they're gay, you're not gay. We could still get together, we could talk, we could go fishing together, go to an event together, but now it's this almost unspoken rule that, well, we can't do those things, we have to cancel each other. How do you build those relationships in a world like that?
Thanks for asking the question. Does this work? First, I guess I hope it's okay to say that I feel honored to be asked to be on this panel. I'm not quite sure, honestly, why I was asked to be on this panel, but I am honored to be here. And I would like to recognize or let you know that I know that I don't know what it's like to be Black. But I do know what it feels like to be loved by Black people in my family and my friends. And I do know what it feels like to love them. And it's been, of course, a great joy and pleasure in my life to have that opportunity. And I thank God for that opportunity every day. And so again, I'm honored to be here and discuss what it is like in our world and what I'm witnessing so rapidly occurring, so very rapidly occurring, is the inability for people to love each other, even though we're different. Thankfully, God made us very different. We're all very, very different. And if we can figure out how to allow ourselves to love people, even though they're different, I feel like that, for me, is the key to being able to move forward. So what I kind of would like to piggyback off of what Josh just said, which is there's a lot of pain. And guess what? Love is pain too. When you love people, there's going to be times that it hurts. And I feel like our young people have been taught they're never supposed to feel pain. They're supposed to be happy all the time, shiny, happy people all over social media. And I want to be able to say I've had a lot of pain for 20 years. A lot of pain. And pain is part of life. It keeps us striving, which are good things. And I think when we're being told we're not supposed to feel pain, then people shut off feeling love. And to me, I feel like it's when we're willing to open our hearts to love is when we can see beyond the angst that's being taught to us from all different avenues, right? So many people of power pushing angst down on the young people. And if I may, so I call her my little 5-year-old. She's part of our family. She's actually my daughter-in-law's niece that came to live with us at one, and her mom. And of course, love her immensely. And she going to Head Start, so little 3-year-old and 4-year-old going to Head Start, would come home and try to communicate that she had been taught something to the effect of that white people had put the Black people down. And she was confused, but I love you. And so she's trying to figure this out, this incongruency of being taught some of those preliminary, I'm sure well-meaning people trying to talk about racism at an age where she's too young to understand what that is. And she loves me, but she's being taught maybe that there's supposed to be a divide.
That's right.
It is too confusing for young people when they don't have that already naturally in them. She loves me, but she's being told she's supposed to have a divide.
Exactly.
And it's so painful for me to have to watch her go through that system of having to be taught one thing, but feeling genuine love. So my hope is that if there's any way that I can be of benefit for somebody in the room here today who's willing to come to the table and say, developmentally, maybe what is the right way to go about this? Because I would never want to diminish the history and experiences that people have had of racism. I would never want to hurt somebody when they've had those experiences. And at the same time, the unintended consequences of the approach that's being given right now is also not the solution. What I think absolutely, Dr. Woodson, wouldn't you agree? Communities of people coming together, parents coming together to teach each other and have these kind of conversations is fantastic. I love it. And I would even go on further to say the departments, et cetera, who are teaching our college students who go out and teach, et cetera, and kind of go back up the ranks, because I'm well aware that I'm sure there's well-meaning anti-racism programs for kids in Head Start and all the way through, right? And yet they turn out to have unintended consequences that didn't accomplish the task, right? So I do think coming together and discussing and having solutions. I love those ideas, so thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. You know, I want to jump over here and go to Gowda on this side of the room. I think he has one of the toughest positions, but he must love it because I just heard he's running for re-election. Gowda, you are the president of the Log Cabin Republicans. They are an organization of individuals, gay, looking for gay policies, make sure that the policy the legislature puts out treat people fairly. And Utah, a red state, conservative state, but you are active in politics, you're promoting policies that I think fellow Republicans would disagree with you on. Can I ask you, generally today in Utah, is it a good time to be a gay Republican?
Yes, I think it is actually. So a little bit of background is actually last year I ran for county clerk in Salt Lake, and there was a primary initially between me and a blonde white lady. And she's a nice lady. I don't mean it in any denigrating way, just to make the point that the Republican delegates selected the openly gay guy over the white lady in that case, right? And I think it was because nobody really cared about the fact that I'm gay. It was kind of, he's the one that we like, he's the one with the best ideas, who happens to also be gay. So I actually think it's a great time to be a gay Republican, and honestly, it's a great time to be gay if you're in Utah. I don't consider it to be an accomplishment to be gay. You know, it's just kind of, yeah, right, it's like that. It's the hand that was dealt, so it is what it is. But, you know, accomplishments are things like, I'm a lawyer, I'm a veteran, I'm the president of Utah Log Cabin Republicans. Those are things I've actually earned. But it's a great time to be a gay man. I think a lot of times, because of the way politics works, we've convinced a lot of younger gay people that it's a horrible time to be gay, or it's a horrible time to be a lesbian, or it's a horrible time to be trans, right? And really, if you just want to live your life, you're protected in terms of employment discrimination. You're protected if you want to buy a home or rent a home. You can get married if you want to. You can have a great career. If you just want to live your life, this is it. You should just go and live your life as an openly gay person. And by far, I would say 99% of people in Utah don't care. They'll just let you be. They'll probably invite you over to their ward for their Christmas party, you know, because they want you to be a part of the community, and they'll respect you. And so that would be my message to people, is just, and to Dr. Woodson's point, I think if in that community of face-to-face neighbors, you can live the basically same life as everybody else. It's a little different because, you know, like, I'll never have a wife or kids, but I can still have a happy life and be productive the way I want to be.
Thank you for that answer. And Carrie, I'd like to take this question to you, if that's possible, and that is, you are very active, you're very busy, and then you decide to not just watch out for your own kids, your own family, but you take the position and role that I have to mobilize my neighbors, I have to mobilize my community. And when I say community, I mean the entire state of Utah. So you pour yourself into this work, and I guess I'm asking why? Like, you could have just said, I'm gonna protect my flock, my sheep, but you are relentless in pursuing these policies for the entire state. Where does that urgency, and why do you do that?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that you said, my flock and my sheep, it comes down to my faith. It comes down to I believe in the individual, and that comes from a religious place, but it also comes from a human and a lived experience place, that the individual is limitless. We are without potential when we, or without limited potential. But when we are pushed into a collective. So what I do is I speak against ethnic studies, and I speak very loudly against ethnic studies every chance I get. Because ethnic studies is not what people think. It's not learning about cultures. It's not reading a story to your child and showing them the past. It's teaching them a double helix of why, first, they are an oppressed group, whether that's because of their race or that is their gender or anything else. Even down, there's currently, I was just sharing it with the people up here, there's currently a mandala of all of the different ways of intersectionality that you can be oppressed, including owning a car. So, I mean, absolutely anything can be a level of oppression. And I think that's such a disturbing way for our children and their mental health. To look at the world and to think, these are all of the reasons that I'm oppressed, which is the first part of the double helix. The second part, and this is Christine Sleater, who actually is behind all of the ethnic studies books. She's got things on YouTube that you can watch. If you watch just an ethnic studies promotional video, it's gonna conveniently leave out the part that not only do they want your child to know their history. I have no problem with knowing their history. I go around the state literally performing Harriet Tubman. I have no problem with people knowing their history. But what I do have a problem with is taking our kids, these kids with all the potential in the world, the kids who we have went through the work for. We've done the work over and over again. Now, are we perfect? No. Behind closed doors, do we have our biases? Yes. But if you want to tell me that only white people have those biases, I will fight you on that. And I know people say, don't fight, be peaceful. But every single person has their biases. So we work on them individually. But we don't take our biases and put them on the new generation. We start that new generation with hope. So that when your kid comes home and your little boy says to you, Mommy, in this book, you and Daddy wouldn't have been able to be married. And you say, yes, that's true. And isn't it amazing? Aren't you so lucky that you were born 50 years later when this isn't an issue, when Daddy and I can be married? Because the world progresses and we can find the beauty in something. So ethnic studies has that one part, which is teaching people that they are a victim or that they are oppressed. That would be their word they would use, as oppressed. And the second part is to dismantle the systems of oppression. That means to take down the West. That's literally what it means. It means to take down the West. So our liberation, what we're watching right now with Hamas, whatever side you're on, either way, both sides of that group, those children are being taught that the other side is against them. And the other thing that these kids are being taught, especially on the other side in Palestine, what they are being taught is that we should not be sovereign nations. And that we should not, that the fact that they're a sovereign nation is the main reason they want to take them down. They're taking them down because it's individuality. They do not want individuality. They want our children to be pawns. And then you ask for what? You're going to take down the system. You're going to dismantle the system. What's on the other side? Or you start looking and you go, who funds Castle? Oh wait, it's the biggest capitalist in the world. But yet our kids are going to the schools and they're saying, down with capitalism. What do we want? We want everything. We're not going to have equitable outcomes with these people. It's not going to happen. So we are pawns, and the Black people have been pawns since about the 1930s. The Black people have been pawns. They went after their families, they went after their identities, they went after their dignity. And now they're turning around and they're doing that to all these other kids. They're saying, look at your points of intersectionality. You're gay, you need to be in this club, and don't you dare step out of line in this club. You're trans, well, the whole world better support you, and when we mean support you, they better let down their own values. And when the last point, sorry, I'm sure I'm talking too long, but the last point is colonization. They will say, we hate colonization, and because of colonization, we need to take everything. Meanwhile, they go around from our churches to our schools, to our families and say, if you don't believe the new way, you have a problem. And we're just gonna make you, we're going to force you, we're gonna force it through your kids, and we're gonna force it on the parents, and we're gonna force it in the schools. And if you don't like it, you're not gonna graduate. If you don't like it, you're gonna lose your job. If you don't like it, your wife's gonna divorce you. We're being colonized by the same people who constantly scream, down with colonization. That's my issue with ethnic studies.
Carrie, thank you for that. I also want to take the time, I will say this, I know that your elected representatives are very busy and they're invited to things all the time. I'm not invited to too many things, but they are. And, Representative Weeks Romer's here, and I also saw Representative Tim Jimenez. So Tim, if you could stand up, and we want to acknowledge him with a round of applause. Heidi as well. Katie Hall. Thank you. I just want you to know they'll get 10 invitations to 10 different events at the same time. And they look at them and they have to decide, which one do I go to? Which one's going to benefit me and my constituents the most? And the fact that they would take the time and to come here, because I think they have to travel to be here. So for them to make that decision, for them to be here, I just wanted to acknowledge them and thank them for that. So thank you for all being here. Yeah, we did. So, Lucy, if I may, you have established yourself in terms of research between the distinctions when people say race, culture, ethnicity. A lot of people use those interchangeably. You've argued that they really aren't interchangeable. Could you share why it's important that those words mean certain things and there should be accountability for using them?
Yeah. Okay, you can hear me? All right. So I guess it would go back to the word social construct, where we have to recognize that everything that we are doing in the society is due to societal norms, somebody writing the rules for us and us following the rules. Sadly, what I see in our nation is that there's not many of us that are thinkers, there's just a lot of us that are followers. It's not just our nation, I would say, I guess it's a human thing, but especially when it comes to this concept, race, culture, and ethnicity. I think a great way to divide people is just to teach them what they mean, when in reality it's not even what research shows what they mean. I always bring up the point that race, according to research, is just physiological differences, period. It's us that have added it to characters and traits and personality. That is not what race is. Society has written that rule for us today that it is. This is why Martin Luther King said, do not judge people by the color of their skin, but by their character. What we've done today is put race and character together, and we don't recognize that that's what's causing the division, and we don't recognize that race is really not significant. Can I really say that today without somebody getting upset? The reality is race is not significant, regardless of what we may think or not think, what we've been taught. So if we stop again and recognize that every word or every term or anything that we know in our society is due to being taught at some point in your life, you will recognize that that is another term that is being used against you daily to divide. Usually culture is the one that shapes us more, and even then, you don't have to follow your culture. Again, culture is written by somebody for you. It is your option to choose to follow it or not. But yet you live in a society that makes it seem like you don't have an option. You have an option. Ethnicity would be the broader term of culture and ethnicity, or race, sorry. My point for all of this is, as a nation, we need to recognize that what we're being fed is not necessarily truth. Where are you receiving truth? Is it just turning on TV, watching your media, listening to your next door neighbor that doesn't even know what they're talking about and following that? Or are you actually looking into research and seeing, where did these terms come from? How did even race start? If you don't know anything about race, it's environmentally influenced due to where we migrated as a people. Race changes environmentally. So people with darker skin have more pigment. 2, be able to be fine in the sun. And people who have whiter skin is to create more ability to gain vitamin D. Yes, race has changed due to people's migration. The fact that we're putting so much significance is a perfect way for people who run this country to divide us. And as many people have mentioned already, in order to rule a country, you must divide the people. But if you want to make a difference, recognize what you're being taught. Don't be just fooled into the ideas of, I guess, societal norms. And do your research and recognize that if you're not doing your research, you're being easily manipulated and being part of that game that they're using to divide. So that's where I would really hit hard. Do your research, do your homework, recognize who you're getting your information from, not simply just turning on the news and being another pawn in their little games that they're trying to use against us.
Thank you. And Joshua, you had a follow-up point you wanted to make?
We've been talking about identity and love here, and I just want to make a suggestion, which is that love is it's the deepest longing, and it is to be cherished. But I'm not so sure you put together a society based on love, nor am I convinced that you put together a society based on honoring and celebrating identities, because I think we don't know who we are. I'm just going to state it. We come to know who we are by building a world together, and I would actually make the call for what I call workable recognition, where I don't really know who I am, you don't really know who you are, but we know we have to build a world together. And it strikes me that a lot of the talk today suggests, no, before we do that, we have to negotiate, honor, and celebrate identity. I think that's wrong.
Yes.
I think the better way to go is we will discover who we are as individuals, maybe even who we are as groups, by full-on engagement in building a world. We discover who we are after we get involved with one another. The exercise of sitting around and deciding who you are in advance, and then declaring that you must be affirmed, et cetera, that has produced a generation, to finally answer your question, which is scared to death. In every university I have ever been in the last 3 years, scared to death to say one thing that's not choreographed speech. And that's wrong. So I would propose we aim for love. Make no mistake about it. Let us aim for love. But in our everyday life, we have to recognize outside of the home, it's workable recognition. That's the best we're going to get, and let's fight for that.
Can I just offer just a footnote to that? When I talked about the suicide and homicides and the crisis, perhaps is fueled by when we're telling young people that whites, that they are oppressors, and blacks, they are victims. Maybe what some of these kids are incorporating those messages, and maybe it's causing them to feel unworthy. And maybe that's what's fueling it. But the other point, to make Joshua's point, I say to my grassroots leaders, we have 3,039 states. They're black, brown, red. And we get together in retreats for 40 plus years. Racial animus never comes up because 80% of the people we support have letters in front of their names, not behind them. They're X something. And when we come together, all we want to talk about and celebrate is how we have overcome our brokenness.
Yes.
And we want to share that process of redemption with everybody. We want to celebrate it. So we don't have time to say, you're not a black junkie or a white junkie or a red junkie, you're just a junkie. And that's what you're trying to overcome. And that's all when we have our conference, I could fill an auditorium with 2,000 of my grassroots leaders for 3 days, and racial and ethnic and gender differences would never come out. Because as Josh says, it's more important for who you are. I want to know, are you my kind, not whether you're my color. And that's the basis upon which I want to have a relationship. Are you my kind? Do we share values? Do we respect one another? Do we understand the importance of forgiveness? That's where we ought to be coming together. And that's why I don't come to universities very often, because I don't understand these kids are scared to death when I speak. They just sit looking around to make sure no one's noticing them.
Thank you. We have 3 more panelists that we're going to get to. The next one is Marcus Carr, the founder of Growing Unified Development. And I have to say, one of the great blessings of being on the state school board is I meet people that I would otherwise not have met. And Marcus Carr is one of those individuals. We first met, and his first question to me was, have you ever had collard greens? And I said, I think I had them in Wyoming. And he said, no, you've never had collard greens. And since that time, we have been to baseball games together. We have been to a demolition derby together. I had the privilege of outbidding him at a charity auction. But just a true, and this goes to what Joshua said, you just love each other, right? You just have a friendship with someone and you don't see color, you don't see race, you just see someone that I'm able to outbid. So with that, Marcus, my question to you is, you from Ogden, right, Weber County, you love this state, you love that community despite the imperfections, despite the mistakes, despite the racism that you've encountered. You still love Utah, you still love the people here. How? Why?
Can you hear me? Well, thank you, Joe. You're a good friend, and it's been a wonderful journey with you. You've been looking at statistics and just the friendship we developed. Also, Chad Sanders, he's my kind. Saunders.
That's right.
Yes. So, it's one thing being a Utah and growing up here and being a historical family. My family came from the Union Station history, one of the original families that came through the Union Station, Utah, and I'm very proud of that. We have been a proud community in Ogden City. Obviously, we grew up in a small town community. So I didn't come from a segregated time. I came from a time where we had poor whites and we had poor Hispanics and then poor blacks, and we had this historical African-American recreational center with this historical boxing program that just brought us all together. I mean, we fought together, we grew up together, and I got white brothers. I can honestly say that. So I can't speak for no other county, but I can speak the way that we honestly grew up during my time in Ogden City that distincts us to have a unique culture together. I've went and ate tacos at some of my good friends' house that were Hispanic, as well as they came over and had red beans and rice of my grandmother's. And I've had white friends and we've shared this culture. I learned how to dirt bike ride from them. I learned how to muskrat trap from my white friends. We were kind of dirty kids, but we had that together in a small town. At one time, the city's kind of tremendously grew, but we had that at one time, just all of us together. And, and so we grew from that. And so, yeah, we dealt and we've had our trials, but also it comes from bad table manners. If you're sitting there, racism is not born, it's taught. The first time I was called a bad name, I didn't understand. I had to go home to understand, like, well, what's this? And then, now did I punch him in the head? Yes. I'm not saying I wasn't a rough kid, but we had that understanding. We went on, and therefore, he's still my good friend today. But at the same time, we've dealt with that. Have I thrown out things? Yes, I have. But, was I wrong? Have we fought? Yes. And, we grew as a community. So no, I don't come from a segregated Utah. No, I don't come from some of these counties where there's hardly any other cultures. You know, it was amazing when I first met my first adopted, black African American kid. I didn't know he was like his mom, and I didn't know. And when he was like my mom and my dad the first time, you know, we're Utahns, you know, and I go over his house and his mom was white, and I was confused. I was like, wait a minute, bro, because his mom didn't look like my mom, you know, and it was the first experience really just getting to even know the adopted African American. So it's like in my culture, it's learning my culture, or even the African culture that's here now. Utah's a wonderful time. It's not about going back in time. It's about what's ahead of the future. I'm sorry, I believe that technology and everything that's changing, we have to have these kids have some form of literacy. You know, no, you don't have to have a college degree, but you gotta read and write. You gotta know mathematics, you gotta know something. And that's what we're about. So we're what you call a blended community that stands for the way it should be stood for. Our historical African American community or recreational center in Ogden City had stood for that. It brought the poor whites. It brought the poor blacks, and it actually brought all the kids, the Hispanics, and it actually brought us all together for a place to go. And from that, we shared culture. Just from that alone, defied the gravity than this stuff that I hear today. So that's why I haven't given up on that there's hope in Utah when I've watched in Ogden City alone and all this stuff that's going on, or I don't focus too much out of another state compared to, you have to point the finger at your own, look in the mirror in your own state and define your problems before you can talk about someone else's. I mean, frankly, I would find that hypocritical if you didn't do so. You're pointing a finger at somewhere else, and you're not pointing a finger in your own state and looking at yourselves, then, you know, that's no fair to just be somewhere else if you can't define the own roots and gravity of your state. And that's how I feel about it, and that's why I haven't given up. I've been through those tough times of racism, but we also have been through those times of resilience. Obviously, I fish with them today. You know, I hang out with them today. And we had those things, but like I said, racism is not born. This stuff is not born. Slanders, that's not born. It's taught. And so that means that we have to be, we have to have a little bit more decency with each other. You know, I don't look at my friends because of their color. I look at them like, man, did you do that? You did that on your own, and I'm not looking at him because of his color, why he may have did something or why he is this type. I look at him as the person, a man or woman that they are and the characters that they hold. And that's what I believe, and that's what's made me resilient about the way I feel about how I am in Utah.
Thank you, Marcus. Yemi. Yemi is chair of the Davis County Republican Party. Yemi, as in that position, you have people coming to you as it should be with their problems, right? They see something wrong, they want to make a change. Whether it's race, culture, DEI, CRT, how are you able to focus on the positive? How are you able to bring people to a middle ground when there doesn't seem to be one?
Yeah, well, the first thing I do is I ask everyone to be a Republican. But no, more seriously, I think the important thing that we try to do within our county leadership and our county elected officials is really trying to reemphasize America, what it's all about, what it truly is about being an American. It's not about the individuality, right? I've heard obviously back in the day there used to be areas for colored people to sort of be, right? Coloreds go here and etc. And today in our community, some universities, we see spaces that are specific for black people or colored people or minorities, and it's like, are we progressing or are we going backwards? And the great thing that I love about being a conservative, about being a Republican is and I'm not just limiting this to just being a Republican, but just speaking for myself, is we try to bring everyone together. Being a Republican doesn't mean that it's not exclusive for one specific group of people or culture or whatever it is. I was elected overwhelmingly in Davis County, and when everyone thought it wasn't going to be a possibility, right? And one of the things, the school of conservatism that I come from is Antonin Scalia, Justice Scalia. And he talked about America, about what makes America great. Is it because we are the strongest nation in the world? Nation in the world? Well, if that's the case, then you would say number 2 would be China, right? And I don't think anyone wouldn't say that, right? Is it because we are the most beautiful country in the world? Well, if that's the case, I can make the case that acre for acre, Switzerland is the most beautiful country in the world.
Venezuela.
And it's always because we are the freest country in the world. In that case, we wouldn't have laws, right? You go to some countries that don't have as many laws. We have a lot of laws, right? So it's not because we are the quote unquote freest country in the world. It's because of the people in our country. It's because our system of government, the ability to delineate the executive power, the judicial power, and the legislative power as well. But the people, where we can argue, we can have arguments, we can disagree on things and still be respectful at the end of the day. And sort of looking at that big tent that we try to have within our county party is that it's open for everyone. It's not limited to who you are in terms of color. And I refuse. When I was running for office, a lot of people came up to me and said, well, you're not going to win in Davis County. There's no way, because you are, making the obvious comments that you're black, right? It's not going to happen. And I said, no, I'm going to give this a chance. I'm going to talk to delegates. I'm going to tell them who I am. I'm going to tell them, my character, and show that to them. And I refuse to be displayed as a commodity of just my race. I refuse to buy into the commercialization of race or victimhood. I have really great role models. Congressman Owens, obviously. We have former Congresswoman Mia Love, great individuals who ran on the content of their character, not because of who they were race-wise. And I just use that as opening that tent for everyone. That's what being conservative is. That's what Republicans. That's what we do as a county party, and that's what we're always going to open it up to. So there's no room for mistakes. No room for bring in the identity politics into place. Well, we're just going to work with the quality of our character and let everything else speak for itself.
Thank you, Yemi. Just 2 individuals. We're going to finish with Ron and then Will. And Ron, you've had a lifetime of accomplishment, 7-time Mr. Natural Universe in bodybuilding, and if you want to see something amazing, Google Ron Williams and look at his picture. Just it makes me a little depressed afterwards. But do it, it's a good thing. But Ron, you have this message of resilience. And I think one thing we're losing, and it may be not in the public schools, but I see it in the public schools, is this lack of resilience, this ability to bounce back. Is that something that can be taught?
Absolutely. Absolutely. First, I want to say, I really appreciate Bob Woodson, everything that he stands for. He said something earlier. He said, I live for you. The reason I live is for you, meaning that the work that he has in his heart is to see this thing flourish and that there's a change in America. That his hope is that we would grasp a hold to what he is saying, and some of these foundational things that are so important for us to not just entertain, but to embrace, to see the change that's going to be made. And another person, I can't help but to say thank you, Jamie, for inviting me and for being the person you are and putting us all in this room. But about resilience, what I want to say is this, is that I come from a pretty, not a great background, where I was not an orphan, but just a child that was passed around. And I was dropped off at 3 years old, touched in a way a child should never be touched. I was on the streets by the age of 15. And one day I made a decision. You know, I was told about, you know, some of you white people, how you were and how you hated black people and that kind of thing. But that wasn't my thing. My thing was, how am I going to survive? How am I going to get from one day to the next? I couldn't read at the age of 28 because of everything that my youth came with. But I made a decision that this wasn't going to be my end. My start was not my decision, but my end has everything to do with what I decide. And so I made the decision that I was going to be better. I learned to read at 28 years old, started writing books. Me and my wife, we own 2 companies, or 3 companies really, a speaking company and a fitness company, and what's the other company we own?
2 fitness companies.
2 fitness companies. One's a fitness company.
She's the owner.
One's a fitness company, and one's a speaking company. Other one is a coaching company, where we actually coach people, and we see tremendous changes in their life. Like Mr. Woodson was saying, that show me the evidence, where people had one mentality, because as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. If you can change the way a person thinks, you can change the way they behave. But if you don't change the way they think, they may give you some lip service. But if you change the way they think, you'll change their behavior. You'll change who they are. There's a lot of things that you can change in life. You can change your shoes, you can change your house, you can change a lot of things. But the only thing that's most significant is when you change a person's mind. And what I learned a long time ago is the precious things in life, the real precious things in life are fortified, and they come out of pressure. Before you can really get the fragrance of a rose, it has to be crushed. With gold, before it's purified, it has to go through the fire. With diamonds, there's pressure that comes against that diamond. And so with our lives, we're the same way. And the resilience part comes that my life was hard growing up, but it made me resilient.
That's right.
So that I can move forward. And a lot of times what we're doing is we're trying to make things too easy for the generation that's below us, many times because we had it so hard. So we want to make it easy for the next generation. But we're depriving them, and we're segregating each other instead of coming together. Me personally, I just love people. I don't care what color you are. Me and my wife, she's this white, pretty, green-eyed blonde. Green hair. She could have green hair, you know, nowadays you never know. She's got a daughter with pink hair. But she's this beautiful blonde with green eyes. We go into some places where they're prejudiced. They hate me because I have a good life, because I'm happy, and because I'm in love. Well, do you know what the scripture says? It says God formed man from the dust of the earth. And so if you look all around the country, you look in Florida, you have the whitest sands there are. You look in Hawaii, you have the black crystal sands. If you are prejudiced because of somebody's skin color, you have a dirty mind. Because your pigment comes from the earth, and that's where it's going back to. You don't judge a person by the color of their skin, as Dr. Woodson says, or Mr. Woodson says. You should be a doctor. They should give you an honorary degree. You are. See, Dr. Woodson. I was right. Well, we can make a difference, but I'm going to tell you something. The thing we have done in America, Yami said, I agree with him. I'm just going to take it a little bit further. It wasn't because we're the biggest country. We're the richest country. It's because of the people. And the reason why the people are the way they were, where they are, is because we were founded on God. We've got to get back to God. When we kick God out, we kick our success moving forward out. We've got to get back to God. I propose, and I talked to Jamie about this, that why don't we create a place where, regardless of what you believe, that we all come together and just begin to seek God in prayer, asking God to bless America again. God bless America. All the things that we're doing that Mr. Woodson is saying, we need to do those things, but let's back it with prayer, the prayer power, and ask God to come in and really bless this nation all over again. Don't get me started. The preacher's coming out. But resilience is so important, and we are a resilient nation. Why are we turning away from our resilience? Let's get our resilience back.
We're going to turn it around. Amen.
I saved Will for the very end because I wanted to talk about the youth and the children, because I think there's a growing sense that there's a missing generation, that it might be too late. And I hear people talk that way, but you have a different message when it comes to our youth and what you do with the Woodson Center. And I just wanted to ask you, I don't believe it's too late. How do you address those individuals who say, we just have to write them off, move on, start over?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me, and thank Jamie and everyone who's here. I get to travel around with Mr. Woodson and learn from him, and sometimes be stepped up by him, but today you all put me after the preacher. And so now I have to figure out where do we go? Well, we're already there. I had a major foundation come to our campus and visit our campus and see our kids, and so what is it that Piney Woods does better than anybody else? Piney Woods School, the oldest historically Black boarding program in the nation. What is it that you do? And we send 96 to 100% of our young people on to college and post-secondary education, and that wasn't what we did better than anybody else. And we take people out of difficult backgrounds and difficult circumstances, and we show them that there are another way in life. And so what I said to them, we do one thing better than anybody else I know, was resilience. Resilience. Lawrence Jones, who started our program 114 years ago, he was a college-educated Black man in rural Mississippi. Wasn't many of him. Right? He chose to reinvest in his community. And he had tried and failed, but he was resilient. And he started Piney Woods with one student. As he was sitting on a fallen log, teaching one young man how to read. The young man was inspired and he came back. He said, come back next day, same place, same time. He came back and he brought a friend with him. And literally each one brought one. And over time, they had enough for a class, and over time, they had enough for a school. Lawrence Jones, at the time, he had virtually run out of money. So he'd been trying to start this program, and he didn't know what to do. And he had to his name some newspapers, some shirts that he could change into $1.65 and a Bible. And those became the foundation of Piney Woods School. In the early days, we would use fallen logs and we'd cut them in half. And the kids would lean over a fallen log as their desk because we couldn't afford desks to read. And they knew that we were a school of faith, and so people would come and visit. And one woman came and visited. She saw everybody kneeling in front of these fallen logs, she thought it was prayer time. And she discovered, no, we were using what we had in our community to resolve an issue in our community. That community was over 85%. This is not black illiteracy, illiterate. All members of that, over 85% illiterate. And Lawrence Jones, a black college-educated man, thought he could bring something to that. The first year after a facility was donated, a log cabin was donated, 40 acres of land were donated, a gentleman in the community donated lumber, and we began to build a building, and a tornado came through, and it was gone. We have since endured 6 tornadoes at Piney Wood School. And each time we rebuild. And each time we refuse to give up. The Piney Wood School story is important to me because it is my story. I was born on the south side of Chicago in one of the worst neighborhoods of Chicago, a neighborhood called Inglewood. It was 2018, Inglewood had the highest murder rate in the city of Chicago. Chicago had the highest murder rate in the country. We would move trying to find a better place. My mother would move us around again and again. And so between kindergarten and the 7th grade, I changed schools at least 7 times. And in the 7th grade, I could not get to school without being recruited by a gang. And I had an opportunity to accept a scholarship from Piney Wood School in Piney Woods, Mississippi. It was an experience that changed my life. And so I left that and I went to college. And the interesting thing about college is, Mr. Williams said, when you get folks together, we're not sitting around talking about race. So we don't do that at Piney Woods, right? There's no need for it. And so when I got to college, I walked in with a sense of confidence that I was there for the same reason everybody else was there, to get an education. Right? And I pursued that, and I did well there, and I practiced law, clerked for federal judges, worked for governors, and worked for the President of the United States. I had a chance to go back to Piney Woods, and I could not think of a better way to use my time than reinvesting in the community that birthed me. And so how do we heal our communities? It starts with us. Josh mentioned we gotta have some face-to-face time, and we challenge our young people. They don't like it when they first come, but you can bring a phone to our campus, but you have to leave it in your room. All of our young people live on site. And what does that do? That forces our young people to talk to people. And so if you come to our campus, you'll see young people talking to you and welcoming you and showing you around and excited to see you. And Bob sent somebody to our campus to do a video, and he said, I've never been to a place where the kids are the ones who are engaging. And he said, I had my phone, nobody else had their phone. I kept feeling like I gotta put mine away. Because we are renewing, rebuilding community, and we're training young people to be resilient. Our young people are just like your story. I don't have time to tell you about all of them, but we have a young lady, her father died, her mother was going legally blind, and so she was tasked with taking care of her 2 younger siblings. She stopped going to school because by the time she got them ready and got them off to school, she was late for school. She eventually came to Piney Woods, and we got her a college scholarship when she left us. And I could keep going down the line. We had a young man came from Chicago. You ask about holding kids accountable, we hold them responsible. He messed up. I gave him a second chance. He messed up again. I sent him home. If you cannot abide by the rules in our community, you cannot be a part of it. He convinced his grandmother to drive him back down to Mississippi, and he sat outside my office for 8 hours to have a word with me. And he came 16-year-old college football player, right? 16-year-old buff young man from inner city Chicago. He came and he sat in my office and he said, I have to be here. And I said, why do you have to be here? And he said, because when I left Chicago and came here, it was the first time that when I go to bed at night, I don't hear gunfire going by my window. And so we create these opportunities for our young people. Whatever they might encounter as they go through life, that they can be resilient and that they can power through it. But then we send them back to invest in their own community. And so Bob Woodson sent a young lady to Piney Woods about 23 years ago. And she had come, she wouldn't mind me saying, she had come from a rough environment where her mom had a drug problem. And Bob and his family had taken care of her. He sent her to Piney Woods, and she did well at Piney Woods. She went to college. She is now back in Washington, D.C., investing in her community. She's teaching in Washington, D.C. She's bought a house. And it's typical of what we do and how do we reinvest in our communities? How do we heal our communities? It comes through our service to one another. That's what we do at Piney Woods School. We believe that what we do is, last point, the most distinguishing factor of Piney Woods is the values that we hold. It's the values that we hold. You want to see what those values are? Go to the Woodson Center website and look at their values. Wow. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you again to our panelists, and I want to turn the time back over to Jamie just for her closing thoughts, and one more round of applause for everyone who has come here today.
While Jamie's coming up, I just want to just say this 2 minutes. From what you heard, this has been very inspiring to me. But the two things we have to do. When Jesus was going to the house of Cyrus to attend to her daughter who was dying, they said she was dead. And when he got there, there were mourners there that they paid, and all the people telling Jesus, why are you going there? She's dead, and all of that. And the first thing Jesus did is get naysayers away from her. He said, get these people away from me. You got to do the same. Criticism is good. Cynicism is lethal. So when people just keep giving you bad, so just keep them away from you. Sometimes you just need them. The other thing that I want to say is that when Frederick Douglass said the worst time on the plantation was at Christmas because the slave master gave the slaves off from Christmas to New Year's. But he wanted the slaves to define freedom by self-indulgence, so he gave them free rum and encouraged them to drink. In fact, he had competition between which slave from which plantation could outdrink the other. And some of them succumbed to that. But Frederick Douglass said, but then there are others responded to that by taking that time and visiting family. Others took the time to work to earn money to buy their freedom. The same circumstance, different response based upon the values that they brought to them. So you're never defined by what someone do. And as Jamie and some others said, is that slaveholders looked at blacks as property. Those who are trying to destroy them look at blacks as pawns. And we have to take that away from them and surround ourselves with people like this. And we can take back this nation, but it's only going to come from the bottom up. So I just want to say thank God that Jamie created this situation, and I pledge that the Woodson Center is going to work with this community to make it really a center for restoration of this nation. And we are going to have a big celebration. We're going to have a grassroots celebration of God and country. And we're going to broadcast it. We're going to, all my groups and 3,000 and all the people I know, we're going to bring them to the table one time to have a celebration of God in this country. I promise you that.
I was hoping to catch that mic before him because I wanted to end with Mr. Woodson's last words. But what a powerful message, and how grateful I am to be surrounded by such incredible people. And it is that face-to-face interaction and working together where we get to know each other on a personal level. And know, I can tell you, everybody at these tables have had a set of heartbreaks. Our journeys in life don't depict whether we're white or black. We all go through some hard things, and it's that connection together and being able to lift each other up and connect in ways that you can't connect on social media. And so that face-to-face is so important. So I'm still going to not end on me. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I also want to recognize Al Jackson. He's a former state senator here in Utah, and also working for the Woodson Foundation, and making the trip back and forth to DC to support Utah. I think he's going to move back, right? But also, I mean, we have some other partners here with us today. Utah Parents United, Brooke and Corinne back there, and also Melanie was somewhere. But anyway, we have all the different organizations represented, most of them up here. Lorenzo is for one and all with Antoine, and man, I always lose this. Andre. They've just done incredible things, and I'm just feel so blessed. But I want to end this meeting with a word of prayer, so I'm going to ask Pastor Ron again if you would start this day of prayer and thought of prayer. And he's going to be reaching out to anyone who's interested in getting us to pull together in the state of Utah and praying for one another and praying for the state of Utah and praying for our nation. So we're going to end this meeting with a word of prayer.
Lord God, we thank you today. We thank you for everybody that's gathered in this room. We thank you for the mission of this room, Father God. We thank you for Bob Woodson. We thank you for Jamie helping to bring this thing together, and all of the people that are very integral. Lord, we have a voice, and we have the ability to make change, Father God, and we know that prayer is something that this country was founded on. You are what this country was founded on. And Lord God, as we move forward, join hands, join arms together, that we will make a big difference, Father God, that we will make the difference. And as Mr. Woodson said, that this would be a state that every other state could look at and say, that is a model of what we need to be. And God, we continue to give you the praise, the glory, and the honor. And we lift your name up and ask that you would bless. And as we leave this place, Lord, we ask that you would guide and lead and protect each one as they go to their respective places. And we say this in the name of Jesus, and we give you praise for it. Amen. Amen. Amen.